overwhelming power, but the problem still isn't solved. In the past few weeks, the U.S. has deployed a level of firepower that, if looking at the actual numbers, represents an almost unprecedented level of intervention. 2 carrier strike groups, multiple Aegis destroyers, along with tens of billions of dollars in military power concentrated into the region. As of mid-March 2026, reports from the U.S. side show that the scale of impact has gone far beyond a typical campaign. From more than 50 to around 120 Iranian naval vessels destroyed or disabled, 11 submarines taken out of operation, multiple military ports paralyzed, and thousands of other targets, including missile and UAV stockpiles, have been struck, with an estimated 1/3 of missile capability eliminated. From an operational perspective, everything is unfolding exactly as designed. Targets are detected, locked, destroyed. Engagements are not failing, and maritime dominance is being maintained in an overwhelming manner. But the actual outcome is moving in a completely different direction. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Commercial flow is nearly paralyzed, with about 95% of shipping traffic gone. More than 3,000 vessels stranded offshore, including hundreds of oil tankers. And the global economy is bearing losses reaching tens of billions of dollars each week. What is notable here is not the lack of power, but the fact that that power does not solve the problem it is facing. If viewed from a systems perspective, this is not an operational failure. On the contrary, the entire system is operating exactly the way it was designed to operate. And that itself exposes a deeper issue, because what is happening in Hormuz is not a type of conflict that these systems are optimized to handle. This is not a space of large targets, not an environment for long-range strikes, and not a place where the highest technology always delivers the highest effectiveness. Instead, it is a narrow corridor where thousands of civilian vessels move intermingled with small, high-speed, low-cost targets, and most importantly, appearing in large numbers. And when the problem shifts from destroying targets to maintaining cost-effective performance, what was previously considered an advantage begins to become a limitation. It is in that context that a question begins to emerge. Why can a system that can control the ocean struggle in a corridor only a few nautical miles wide? And why does the solution to this problem not come from the most modern platforms, but from a design that has existed for more than half a century? A-10 Warthog, not the fastest platform, not the most advanced platform, but in an environment like Hormuz, it begins to show something that other systems do not have. Not greater power, but precise alignment with the problem that exists. The real problem is not scale, but target structure. If only looking at the map, the Strait of Hormuz is not a very constrained space, with a width of about 21 nautical miles at its narrowest point. But in reality, the lanes that commercial ships can actually move through safely are significantly reduced, down to only about 6 nautical miles. That creates an extremely narrow corridor where thousands of civilian vessels are forced to move within the same space, with almost no margin for error. It is exactly under these conditions that the nature of the problem begins to change. On the other side, Iran does not build its strategy around large platforms or expensive systems. Instead, they focus on a simpler but much harder to counter factor: numbers. The fast attack boat force is estimated to range from 1,000 to 1,500 units, with typical speeds of around 50 to 70 knots, and in some cases exceeding 90 or even 100 knots. The cost of each platform ranges from tens of thousands to a few $100,000 USD, far lower than any weapon system deployed to counter them. If looking at each individual target, this is not a significant threat. But they do not appear that way. They are organized in clusters, typically from 30 to 50 boats in a single approach, moving from multiple directions at high speed within a space of only a few nautical miles. The objective of this approach is not direct confrontation, but to create continuous pressure of numbers, pressure of response time, and most importantly, pressure on the opponent's operational cost. In such an environment, the question is no longer whether the targets can be destroyed or not, but shifts to a more systemic issue: whether effectiveness can be maintained during the process of destroying them. Because each firing decision at this point is not simply a military action, but at the same time also an economic decision. And when targets costing only tens of thousands of dollars appear in groups of dozens at the same time, any system not designed to handle this type of pressure will gradually lose its advantage. In other words, this is no longer a confrontation between firepower platforms, but a problem between cost and quantity, a type of problem that not every system is built to solve from the beginning. Current systems, powerful but not suitable. The problem becomes clearer when looking at how current systems are deployed to handle this type of target. In theory, the U.S. Navy does not lack tools. Destroyers equipped with the Aegis system can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. With missiles like the SM-6 capable of destroying targets at long range, each costing around $5 million, anti-ship missiles such as Harpoon, with a cost of about $1.5 million per launch, are also designed to engage surface targets with high precision. But this is exactly where the mismatch begins to appear. These systems are designed to counter targets of comparable value: large warships, coastal defense systems, or threats with high and clearly defined levels of danger. When they are used against fast attack boats costing only tens of thousands of dollars, the problem is no longer about whether they can be destroyed, but whether the cost of destroying them remains reasonable. This becomes even more evident when considering the speed and tempo of the engagement. A single wave of attack may include dozens of targets moving simultaneously within a confined space, forcing defensive systems to respond almost continuously. Under such conditions, using weapons that cost millions of dollars per shot not only rapidly depletes resources, but also creates sustained operational pressure over time. Other options also do not solve the problem in a more effective way. Naval guns, while having high rates of fire, are still limited by range, accuracy, and the ability to engage multiple fast-moving targets at the same time. Fighter aircraft such as the F/A-18s, although capable of carrying a variety of weapons, operate at speeds that are too high, often above 500 knots, reducing the time for pilots to identify and distinguish targets in a dense civilian maritime environment to just a few seconds. Armed helicopters may offer more flexibility, but they are limited by payload and loiter time, making it difficult to sustain effectiveness against continuous waves of attacks. And it is at this point that a gap begins to emerge, a type of mission that none of these systems are truly optimized to handle: slow enough to observe, long enough to maintain presence, and cheap enough to respond repeatedly without disrupting the overall cost balance. This is not a new requirement, but in an environment like Hormuz, it becomes clearer than ever, and it is also exactly the type of mission that, if looking back, there was once a platform designed almost precisely for it. Where the system breaks, and another solution emerges. And when placing the entire problem into the correct context, the solution no longer lies in increasing firepower or deploying more expensive systems, but shifts in a completely different direction, finding a platform that can operate effectively within the very constraints that this environment creates. That is when a name begins to reappear: A-10 Warthog, a platform designed in the 1970s, not stealthy, not fast, and when placed next to modern systems, it almost has no significant technological advantage. But precisely because it was not built for high-tech warfare, it possesses a set of characteristics that, in a context like Hormuz, become especially suitable. The A-10 did not start from the idea of building a better aircraft. It started from a very specific requirement: to create a platform capable of destroying ground targets at low cost, repeatedly, while still maintaining effectiveness in a dense fire environment. And to do that, Its entire design revolves around a single thing: the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 30mm system with a firing rate of up to about 3,900 rounds per minute, equivalent to more than 60 rounds per second, with each round costing just over $100, in a short burst lasting less than 2 seconds. The A-10 can fire more than 100 rounds, enough to completely disable a fast-attack boat-sized target at a total cost of only a few $1,000s. This is not a complete replacement for existing systems, but it solves exactly the part that those systems are not optimized for: the ability to continuously engage small targets appearing in high density, while keeping costs at a level that can be sustained over time. More importantly, the A-10 does not carry only a single type of weapon. With 11 hardpoints and a payload capacity of up to around 7 tons, it can combine multiple layers of firepower within the same mission, from the cannon for close targets, to Maverick missiles for harder targets, and low-cost guided systems like APKWS to handle small targets with high precision. This creates a level of flexibility that few platforms can achieve at the same cost level. And when placed into the context of Hormuz, the role of the A-10 becomes clearer. It is not a replacement for naval forces. It is the missing piece in a system that is already very powerful, but not yet optimized for the type of pressure it is facing. Design. Everything serves a single problem. If looking at the A-10 from the outside, the first thing that stands out is that it does not resemble a conventional fighter aircraft. Its shape almost goes against every modern design trend: straight wings, a thick fuselage, engines mounted high and fully exposed, all of which do not serve speed or stealth. But it is exactly at that point that its design logic begins to reveal itself, because the A-10 is not optimized to avoid being hit, but is built on the assumption that it will operate in an environment where ground fire is always present. And this is most clearly reflected in how it is built around the GAU-8 cannon. This cannon is not simply an added weapon, but the center of the entire design, with a firing rate of about 3,900 rounds per minute. The recoil force is nearly equivalent to the thrust of the engines, forcing the entire airframe to be designed to withstand that pressure. The gun barrel is aligned close to the center axis to reduce deviation during firing, and the system even retains spent casings to avoid imbalance during flight. But firepower is only part of the problem. To use that firepower effectively, the aircraft needs the ability to control space at low speed, and that is why the A-10's wings are designed completely differently. Instead of swept wings like supersonic fighters, the A-10 uses straight wings with a large surface area, allowing it to maintain stable lift at around 300 knots. This gives the pilot more time to observe, identify targets, and adjust the approach, an especially critical factor in environments like Hormuz, where targets are small and often mixed among civilian vessels. The engine configuration reflects the same logic. The two engines are mounted high on the rear fuselage, separated from areas most exposed to ground fire, while also reducing the risk of ingesting debris during low-altitude operations. This placement also helps reduce the infrared signature from certain angles, increasing survivability against short-range air defense systems. Under the wings, the 11 hardpoints allow the A-10 to carry a payload of up to around 16,000 pounds, combining multiple types of weapons within a single mission. This creates the ability to handle a wide range of targets, from fast attack boats, lightly armored vehicles, to fixed coastal positions, without relying on a single type of firepower. And when it comes to survivability, the A-10 follows an almost completely different philosophy compared to modern platforms. The cockpit is protected by a thick titanium armor layer, often referred to as the bathtub, capable of withstanding large-caliber armor-piercing rounds. The control systems are designed with redundancy, allowing the aircraft to continue flying and even land safely despite severe damage. What matters here is not each individual detail, but how all of these elements come together to serve a single objective: maintaining operational effectiveness in an environment with high threat density, low-cost targets, and continuous pressure over time. And when placing this structure into the context of Hormuz, it becomes clear that the A-10 is not an outdated design. It is simply a design created for exactly the type of problem that this environment is presenting: cost effectiveness. When the equation is flipped, when placing all these factors side by side, what begins to change is not the way targets are destroyed, but the way the effectiveness of the entire system is evaluated. In a standard scenario, using a missile like the SM-6, costing around $5 million, to destroy a maritime target is entirely reasonable, if that target is a warship or a threat of comparable value. But in an environment like Hormuz, where a fast attack boat may cost only tens of thousands of dollars, this equation starts to lose balance from the very beginning. The same target, if engaged by the GAU-8 cannon, would cost only a few $1,000s for a short burst, often under $10,000 to completely disable a composite boat. This creates a disparity that can reach hundreds of times, and in some cases, exceed a ratio of 400 to 1 when compared directly with modern air defense missile systems. This difference is not just theoretical. When targets appear in groups of dozens in a single attack wave, the total cost of response becomes a decisive factor. A salvo of missiles can quickly consume tens of millions of dollars within minutes, while the same mission, carried out by a platform like the A-10, can sustain continuous firepower at a much lower cost without degrading operational capability over time. The same pattern appears when comparing other layers of weapons. An anti-ship missile like the Harpoon, costing around $1.5 million, is designed to destroy large targets but becomes inefficient when used against small, low-value targets. Meanwhile, an AGM-65 Maverick missile, costing around $100,000 to $150,000, can handle harder targets at a significantly lower cost. At an even lower tier, systems like APKWS, costing only around $30,000 per launch, are still capable of destroying fast attack boats or light targets with high precision. When placing all these numbers side by side, one thing becomes clear. This is no longer a competition between weapon systems. This is a competition between cost equations. And in that equation, the A-10 is not the most powerful platform, but it is one of the few platforms that can maintain a balance between effectiveness and cost in an environment where pressure comes from quantity and time. This also explains why, in certain specific scenarios, a platform that appears outdated can become a more reasonable choice than far more modern systems. Because at this level, warfare is no longer determined by who has the more advanced technology, but by whom can they sustain effectiveness longer without exhausting their own resources. How the A-10 operates. If placing all these factors into a real scenario, the way the A-10 operates becomes much easier to visualize. Instead of approaching at high speed like fighter jets, the A-10 typically maintains a speed of around 300 knots, slow enough for the pilot to observe directly, but still fast enough to remain safe in an environment with active fire. At low altitude, it does not just see the target, but has time to distinguish, assess, and choose the appropriate approach, something that is almost impossible if there are only a few seconds to react. In an area like Hormuz, where fast attack boats can appear mixed in with civilian vessels, this ability to identify is not just an advantage. It is a requirement to avoid mistakes that could create consequences greater than the original target. When a cluster of targets begins to form, the A-10 does not need to leave the area to reposition. With a loiter time that can extend close to 2 hours, it can maintain continuous presence, circle, adjust its angle of approach, and fire multiple times within the same area. A short burst from the GAU-8 is enough to handle individual targets, while other weapons such as APKWS or Maverick can be used when higher precision is required or when the target demands it. What matters here is not achieving the fastest possible kill. It is the ability to control the tempo of the entire engagement area, reducing pressure over time, rather than allowing pressure to accumulate. And if viewed from a personal perspective, this is probably the point where the A-10 differs most clearly from other platforms. It does not attempt to overwhelm the battlefield in a short moment, but maintains continuous control, gradually weakening the pressure from the opposing side. In an environment like Hormuz, where risk comes from quantity and repetition, this approach is often far more effective than large but intermittent strikes. In other words, the A-10 does not change warfare through superior power, but by changing how warfare is operated. And if you find analyses like this help you better understand the nature of military systems, not just how powerful they are, but how well they fit specific problems, then you might consider subscribing, because upcoming content will continue in this direction.